Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It is so good to be here with you this morning. My name is Justin Wheaton, and today we are going to go through a section of this week's Torah portion. Now, normally, when I'm up here, I like to give a recap of the events that happened from the last Torah portion I preached on up to this one. But I'm not going to do that today because this is the last sermon that I'll get to preach in Numbers before we move on to Deuteronomy. And I thought it would be nice to have a message on chapter 33, which gives us a complete itinerary of the events from the Exodus to just before they enter the land. So basically this means from Egypt, the Exodus of Egypt, to just before they conquer Jericho. Now, I really like this chapter in Numbers because it has a great deal of geography, but it also allows me to expound upon many events that happened at each place that the Israelites went. And this means I get to preach on things that my Torah portion never landed on. So our verses today are going to be Numbers 33, verses 1 through 56. Now let me open up in a quick word of prayer. Dear Lord, I pray that as I give this message today, that you speak through me and that you give me wisdom and that I'm able to convey the message that you want to convey and that I'm able to make this passage, which may seem like just a list of places that they went, that I pray that you help me make it come alive and that we all learn more about you from this and grow in our love for you, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Now, I want you to take away two things from this sermon. The first one is that God acts in history. The things that we read about in this are real places with real events happening to real people. And I can't stress this enough. And the second thing I want you to remember is that God is always with his people. He never abandons them. And even more than that, he actually desires to be with us. And I don't want to minimize that fact. We seek out God for sure, but he seeks us out too. And then at the end of the message, I want to give us all a call to action, similar to what Moses does. So go ahead and open up your Bibles with me to Numbers 33, chapters 1 through 56. So, verses 1 through 4 tell us, these are the journeys of the Israelites who went out from the land of Egypt by their host, by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses recorded their starting places according to their journeys by the mouth of the Lord. And these are their journeys according to their starting places. And they set out from Ramesses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month. From the day after Passover, the Israelites went out boldly in the sight of all Egypt. Now Egypt was burying the firstborn who the Lord struck down, and on their gods the Lord executed judgment. So when Moses gives us this message in Numbers 33, we are at the end of the 40-year wilderness wanderings, and the new generation, the sons and daughters of this Exodus generation, are about to enter the land of Canaan. So Moses is recapping to this new generation the events that their parents went through in order to illustrate to them who God is and what he did for them, but also to remind the new generation of the many mistakes their parents made in hopes that they don't make the same mistakes. And we start our recap in the wilderness years right after the final plague against Egypt, the death of the firstborn. And this is the literal historical event that anchors a huge number of things in the Bible, especially related to God's character and Israel. You find phrases like, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, throughout the entirety of the Hebrew Bible and also throughout the New Testament. Everything is rooted in this. The first verse in the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20 says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt from the house of slavery. Leviticus 11:45 says, For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt in order to be your God, and you will be holy, for I am holy. Numbers says it here and in other places. Deuteronomy's reading of the Ten Commandments for the new generation says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery. Judges 2 says, I brought you up from Egypt, and I brought you to this land which I swore to your fathers. Psalm 81, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Jeremiah 7, on the day that I brought them out of Egypt. This is all over the Hebrew Bible. I only gave a couple of examples. But my point here is that God anchors his salvific work in history. And there are other times when God does this. Most notably is the resurrection of our Messiah, without which, as Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, Christianity is meaningless. Without a physical, literal, historical resurrection, Christianity is meaningless. And I'm harping on this so much because this is the world that I live in. One of the most effective ways to kill someone's faith, one of the ways is to eliminate the historical Exodus. But the text itself does not allow us to do this. So the Israelites start their journey from Canaan, or start their journey to Canaan from the city of Ramesses after the inauguration of the yearly Passover festival. And then after God struck his final blow against the Egyptian gods and Pharaoh by killing his firstborn son, a result that he brought on himself for refusing to humble himself before God. Now remember, the Passover is anchored in the fact that this was a historical event. If there was no Exodus, the Passover wouldn't have any meaning. And here are two reconstructions of what this city may have looked like. On the left, right here, we have, if we go with the late dating of the Exodus. The one on the right is if we go with the early dating of the Exodus. And as you can see, whichever dating we go with, this was a great city, and one of the cities that the Israelites helped build. So after leaving Ramesses, verses 5 through 13 tell us, and the Israelites journeyed from Ramesses and they camped at Sukkot. Then they journeyed from Sukkot and they camped in Etham, which was at the edge of the desert. And they journeyed from Etham and they turned to Pi-hahiroth, which is before Baal-Zaphon, and they camped before Migdal. And they journeyed from Pi-hahiroth and they crossed over in the midst of the sea to the wilderness. And they went on the way 3 days in the wilderness of Etham, and they camped in Marah. And they journeyed from Marah and they came to Elim. And in Elim there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. And they journeyed from Elim and they camped by the Sea of Reeds. And they journeyed from the Sea of Reeds and they camped in the wilderness of Sin. And they journeyed from the wilderness of Sin and they camped in Dophkah. And they journeyed from Dophkah and they camped in Alush. So we have a number of significant locations here. The Israelites leave Ramesses and go to Sukkot, which is right here. And from there they head to Etham. And the text of the Exodus makes sure to point out that God is personally leading them in the form of a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And from Etham, they head to Pi-hahiroth, which is near the locations of Baal-Zaphon and Migdal. Pi-hahiroth is the location that they crossed over, they crossed through the Sea of Reeds. Now, all 5 of these locations, Etham, Pi-hahiroth, Baal-Zaphon, Migdal, aren't exactly known, their exact location. But, and there are numerous proposals, but I'm going to go with Egyptologist James Hoffmeyer, which you can see here. He places it right here. And it's possible that the Sea of Reeds that the Israelites cross over is the El Balak Lakes right here. It is almost certainly, though, not the Red Sea that we think of today. Down here is the Red Sea. All 3 of these bodies of water have been proposed. This one is the one I'm going with. After they cross the water in Exodus, and the Egyptians are defeated, a great song is sung by the Israelites in Exodus 15. This passage is called the Song of Moses, or the Song of the Sea. On the screen is the parting of the sea by Moses from the movie The Prince of Egypt, which I really love. Now, the parting of the waters wasn't this dramatic, but I love it anyway. And the people sing a song glorifying God who had set them free from slavery and then led the way, never once abandoning them, and also protected them from the pursuing Egyptian army. Because remember, immediately after they left, the Egyptians changed their mind and they chased after them. Like the Israelites, though, we should glorify God every day because of how amazing He is. God leads us through stuff every single day. And in the midst of suffering, He is always there. We should be saying things like, Ashira ladonai ki ga'o ga'a, mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar ba'kodesh, nachita bechastacha amzu ga'alta. Sing to the Lord, for He is highly exalted. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness? You have led by your loving kindness a people whom you have redeemed. Now, obviously, this is a vastly different context, but we should glorify Him nonetheless. And this map shows 3 proposed routes and 2 of the proposals for the location of Mount Sinai. Right down here and then right here. It's a lot darker than I thought it was going to be. Like I mentioned, many of the locations of these places aren't completely known yet. So there are a lot of opinions. And this shouldn't hurt your thoughts on the historicity of the Exodus, though, because there's a lot of ancient things that haven't been found. I could name 5 or 10 off the top of my head. And the further back in time you go, the harder things are for them to survive. And this took place approximately 3,500 years ago, give or take. That's a long time for things to stay around. And after the crossing of the Red Sea, the people go to a place called Marah, which had bitter, undrinkable water. And the first thing the Israelites do is grumble against Moses. They literally, 3 days before this, watched God split the water so they could walk through, and they lose faith that God would take care of them. However, God does take care of them and makes the water drinkable for them. And then from Marah, they go to Elim. And then from Elim, they go to the wilderness of Sin. And when they got there, guess what they did? They grumbled against Moses again, wishing they were back in Egypt instead. Again, though the people didn't trust in God, God took care of His people. He gave them manna and meat. They grumbled, yet He was still there for them. And from the wilderness of Sin, they went to Dophkah and then to Alush, 2 more unknown locations. Verses 14 through 17 tell us, and they journeyed from Alush, and they camped in Rephidim, and there was no water there for the people to drink. And they journeyed from Rephidim, and they camped in the wilderness of Sinai. And they journeyed from the wilderness of Sinai, and they camped in Kibroth Hattaavah. And they journeyed from Kibroth Hattaavah, and they camped in Hazeroth. After Alush, they go to Rephidim. Now again, this site is not completely known for sure. This area is one huge desert. Exodus 17 says that Rephidim is still in the wilderness of Sin, one of these circled locations that I have here. And while they're at this place, they get a similar story. We get another similar story. There's no water to drink. And instead of having faith that God would get them through it, because He has time and time again, they start quarreling with Moses and grumbling at him. They again want to go back to Egypt. But God is still taking care of them, because it is here that Moses is told to strike the rock with his staff. And when he did, water came gushing out. It's also here at Rephidim that the Amalekites come and attack the Israelites. Now, this image isn't completely accurate, but it still helps us visualize the battle. Now, out of nowhere, it seems, the Amalekites attack a weary and weak people. But God is not going to allow his people to be wiped out. He orders Moses to hold his staff in the air, and as long as he held it up, the people of Israel prevailed, and they won the battle. And because of this heinous attack, God begins a process to wipe out the memory of the Amalekites. Despite all their complaining and their lack of faith, God still kept them safe and kept his promise to give them the land of Canaan. And then finally, after 3 months of traveling, the Israelites finally come to Mount Sinai. On the screen, I'm showing 2 pictures of the traditional site of Mount Sinai. These are the southern location. And there are other proposals, but this one is the most famous, and it's got the most pictures. And this is a monastery called St. Catherine's Monastery that was built on their traditional site. While at Mount Sinai, Moses receives the 10 Commandments, building instructions for the tabernacle, and all of the laws for Israelite society that make up the end of the book of Exodus and the whole book of Leviticus. Now, I can't go in depth on it, can't go in depth on everything here, but I do want to note 2 things. One, like I said at the beginning of my sermon, the 10 Commandments have at their foundation the literal rescuing of Israel from their Egyptian slavery. This was a real historical event. And 2, God has the people build his tabernacle, his mobile temple, in the midst of his people. He doesn't need a temple, he's God. But he wants to be with his people, to dwell with them, and be there throughout all of their hardships. And this is no small thing. And God hasn't changed one bit. He still dwells with us today, except that we get to be even closer to God than any of the Israelites, including the priests. The Holy Spirit, who is God, one of the persons of the Trinity, personally dwells inside of all believers. And this means that God is always with us. Now, it's been a little over a year now, and the Israelites leave Sinai and go to Kibroth Hattaavah. And they saw the Israelites saw God's presence descend on Mount Sinai. They saw God's presence descend in the tabernacle multiple times. They saw Moses' face shine after speaking with God. Exodus 24 tells us that Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel went up the mountain and literally saw the God of Israel. That's what the text says. They saw the God of Israel. And after all of this, when they get to Kibroth Hattaavah, they start grumbling again because they don't want to eat manna anymore. They want to go back to Egypt and eat meat like they used to. So God provides quails for them. However, because of their greed and rejection of what God was already giving them, God struck the people with a severe plague that killed many people. God provided for them constantly, and yet the people wanted more and more, so much so that they didn't even want what God was providing for them. They wanted him to give them even better things. And how many times do we do exactly this and are not satisfied with what God has given us? How many times do we get greedy and, despite what God has already given us, want even more? We need to learn to be content with what God provides for us. And after Kibroth Hattaavah, they stop at Hazeroth. And this picture shows where it could have been if we go with a southern Mount Sinai location. Now, I'm going to show you a big chunk of text here. And I'm sorry that it's small, but you'll understand why in a minute. Verses 18 through 36 say, "And they journeyed from Hazeroth, and they camped in Rithmah. And they journeyed from Rithmah and camped in Ramon Perez. And Ramon Perez they camped in Libnah. They journeyed from Libnah and camped at Rissa. And they journeyed from Rissa and they camped at Kehelathah. And they journeyed from Kehelathah and they camped in Mount Shapher. And they journeyed from Mount Shapher and they camped in Haradah. And they journeyed from Haradah and camped in Machiloth. And they journeyed from Machiloth and they camped in Tahath. And from Tahath they camped in Terah. And from Terah they camped in Mithkah. From Mithkah they camped in Hashmonah. From Hashmonah they camped in Moseroth. From Moseroth they camped in Bnei Yaakan. From Bnei Yaakan they camped in Hor Haggidgad. From Hor Haggidgad they camped in Yotbatah. From Yotbatah they camped in Abronah. From Abronah they camped in Etzion Geber. And they journeyed from Etzion Geber and they camped in the wilderness of Zin. That was Kadesh. Imagine being up here trying to say all those names. All of these places are somewhere around here in this red circle, if we take the southern route. I link all these places together because nothing really happens in any of them, except one of these locations is the place where Moses sent out the spies from. When they were at one of these places, God told Moses to send out spies to spy out the land of Canaan. One person from each tribe, so 12 total. They're told to go into the Negev, the southern part, right here, through Canaan, up to Lebo Hamat, which is in southern Lebanon. Now on screen here, the top left picture shows Beersheba, which is a city in the Negev. And then on the top right is likely the ancient city of Hebron. And then the bottom left is possibly the valley of Eshcol. And then the bottom right, the bottom left is valley of Eshcol, and the bottom right is the Bekaa Valley. Bekaa Valley is right up here. So these are actually the biblical dimensions of the land of Canaan. They were supposed to stretch from here all the way up into Lebanon, but as we know, they really only get this small territory right here. While they're at these places, while the spies are out spying the land, they see fearsome peoples and they become afraid. And when they return to Moses at Kadesh Barnea, right here where the blue arrow goes, they're so fearful and have such little faith in God, who's been with them, taking care of them in the wilderness, who literally toppled the most powerful kingdom in the world just a little over a year ago, that the spies incite a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. Again, they want to go back to Egypt. Only two of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, know that God would still give them the land despite these fearsome people. But it wasn't enough. The 10 spies were in control of the people. And as a result of this open rebellion against God and the leaders he chose, Moses and Aaron, all of that generation, except for Joshua and Caleb, were barred from entering the promised land. And only their children were going to be able to go in. See, before this, they could have just, boom, went right in right here. But now, they're going to have to wander for 40 years until this generation, or 38 years, until this generation dies off. Let this be a lesson for us. Fear is a powerful thing, and it can grow. It can often grow so much that it lessens people's faith in God, or they lose it altogether. The same thing happens to us. I can think of examples of myself doing something that, to a lesser extent, doing something that I've felt God calling me to do, or go somewhere that God's called me to go, and that was really outside of my comfort zone. And as a result, I can think of times where I didn't do that thing or didn't go to that place. This has happened to me, for example, with God wanting me to share the gospel with someone. And instead of doing that, I got scared and forgot that God was right there with me the whole time and that I wasn't alone. Don't let anything hurt your faith in God, because He is always with you. Now, I know bad things happen, and sometimes really bad things happen, but God is still always there. Numbers 37 through 46 tell us, and this begins the portion that I read in the Torah scroll. And they journeyed from Kadesh, and they camped in the mountain of Hor at the edge of the land of Edom. And Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor according to the mouth of the Lord, and he died there. In the 40th month after the Israelites went out from the land of Egypt, in the 5th month on the first day of the month. And Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. And the Canaanite king of Arad, he was dwelling in the Negev in the land of Canaan, heard when the Israelites came. And they journeyed from Mount Hor, and they camped in Zalmonah. And they journeyed from Zalmonah, and they camped in Punon. And they journeyed from Punon, and they camped in Oboth. And they journeyed from Oboth, and they camped in Iye-Abarim, on the border of Moab. And they journeyed from Iyim, and they camped in Dibon-Gad. And they journeyed from Dibon-Gad, and they camped in Almon-Diblatayim. Right after they initially get to Kadesh, Miriam the prophetess dies, Moses' sister. And then immediately after, the Israelites start grumbling again against Moses and Aaron because now they have no water again. But like every other time, God has taken care of them time after time. Like every other time, they still have so little faith that He's going to protect them, despite God being there every single step of the way and demonstrating that multiple times. They still have so little faith that He's going to protect them. How quickly do they forget everything God's done for them? How quickly do we often forget everything God has done for us as well? And it's easy, it's so easy to look down upon these Israelites. But remember, we are these Israelites. And what I mean by that is we do the exact same things that they do, obviously in a different context. We forget God, we abandon God, we grumble against God, despite all of the things that God has done for us. Now, after hearing the grumbling of the people, God tells Moses and Aaron to assemble the people. Moses is told to take his staff and speak to a nearby rock, and it'll give water. This is just like what Moses did earlier in the journey, right after they came out of Egypt. He takes his staff, he smacks the rock, and water comes out. But this time, he's told to speak to it. So Moses and Aaron gather all the people, and Moses gives a great speech. Well, I mean, it's only a couple verses, but I imagine it would have been great, about how rebellious and untrusting this people is. And you know what Moses immediately does after that? He hits the rock and water comes out. And this makes God extremely angry because now Moses and Aaron have a lack of faith in God. God said to speak to the rock, but Moses hits it instead. And as a result, now Moses and Aaron both are barred from entering the land of Canaan. Moses and Aaron were God's representatives, His chosen leaders to the people. When they sin against God, the punishment is much worse. Think of what the Apostle James tells us in James 3. I think about this verse a lot. Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur stricter judgment. So God bars Moses and Aaron from the land, but God still allows water to come forth from the rock because even though they are constantly grumbling and have such little faith, He still takes care of them. He's still with them because that is who God is. That is His nature. Now, what Numbers doesn't tell us is the massive time jump that occurs. From Kadesh to Mount Hor, their next stop, it's been roughly about 38 years, which means they've been wandering for 40 years. The 40-year wandering is over. The old generation has died off, and the new generation is ready to enter the land. And when they get to Mount Hor, Aaron dies at the age of 123. Remember, he can't go into Canaan. Now, the location of Mount Hor is unknown, But I think it would have been somewhere in this mountain range right here because of a later thing that Numbers says and links it with Mount Seir, which was right here. You can see, well, yeah, right here. So I think it would have been right here, but it's not known completely. I'm thinking somewhere in this mountain range. While the new generation is at Mount Hor, the king of Arad hears about it. You can see Arad in the picture here. This is Tel Arad in the Negev, the southern portion of Israel. He sets out to destroy Israel after hearing that they've come. And in response, this new generation makes a vow to God. They say, if you will indeed deliver this people into my hand, talking about the king of Arad and his army, then I will utterly destroy their cities. The Lord hears this great act of faith on the part of this new generation, and he delivers the enemy into their hands. And then they move out from Mount Hor, and the red arrows are mine. They move out from Mount Hor and move south toward the city of Elat. And then guess what happened? They became impatient and grumbled against God and Moses. After this great declaration of faith, where God literally answers the prayers and demonstrates that he is with them, they forget. And as a result of this sin, God kills many people. And his hand has only stayed because the people recognize their transgression and Moses intercedes for them, which he often does. And like I keep saying, I say this over and over because we need to stay humble. We are just like this. We experience things that God does in our lives, and then we so quickly forget about them and start grumbling. We have to learn to be content or to recognize what God has given us. All we really need is him anyway. This life passes away, but the Lord is forever. And then the Israelites moved north around Edom and around Moab, moving north towards the place where they're going to enter the land. They cross over the Zered Canyon right here, this massive canyon. They cross over the Arnon Canyon right here. And in our final set of verses, the Israelites go to the place where Moses will give his great sermon in Deuteronomy. Verses 47 through 56 say, and they journeyed from Almon Diblatayim, and they camped in the hill country of Abarim in front of Nebo. And they journeyed from the hill country of Abarim, and they camped in the plains of Moab, along the Jordan near Jericho. And they camped along the Jordan from Beth Yeshimoth until Abel Shittim in the plains of Moab. And the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab, along the Jordan near Jericho, saying, speak to the Israelites, and you will say to them, when you cross over the Jordan to the land of Canaan, and you will dispossess all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and you will annihilate all of their reliefs, their stone carvings, and all their molten images you will annihilate, and all their high places you will destroy, places of worship on hills. And you will possess the land, and you will dwell in it, because I gave the land to you in order to possess it. And you will divide the land by lot for your families. To the larger you will increase its inheritance, and to the smaller you will decrease its inheritance. To which its lot falls, there it will be for it. It's a weird Hebrew portion, but I kept it literal. You will inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. And if you do not dispossess the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those whom you spare from among them will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they will trouble you in the land which you are living. And what I plan to do to them, I will do to you. So the people travel from Almon Diblatayim and toward Abarim, which is near Mount Nebo, the place where Moses will eventually die, through the plains of Moab, and they stop at Abel Shittim, right here. This is where they're going to cross over into Jericho, right there. Straight shot through the Rift Valley, hitting Jericho. Israel fights various battles during this time, and there were two events that I want to highlight here. The first is that Balak, the king of Moab, after seeing the Israelites defeat the Amorites, sends for the great Mesopotamian seer named Balaam to come and curse Israel by his gods, the Mesopotamian gods. And if he does this, then Balak would be able to conquer Israel. However, God did not allow Balaam to do this. Instead, he ends up blessing Israel. And this is significant because the Mesopotamian gods are seen, or were seen, as very powerful in the ancient Near East. But they had no chance against the Lord, exactly like the gods of Egypt. Never forget this lesson. Our God is actually God, and everything else are cheap imitations that can't do anything. Our God protected Israel along their journey from Egypt to this point. Egyptian and Mesopotamian gods did nothing because they can do nothing, because they are not gods. And the second thing I want to mention is the scene at the place called Peor. Peor is, if we can see it, right here, maybe. Possible spot. While the Israelites were camped at Shittim, the people began to intermarry with the people of Moab, something that God had warned about many times to the old generation and the new one. These Moabites then started to lead the Israelites astray. They started to lead them into worshiping the Moabite gods, in particular, Baal. This is an Ugaritic depiction of Baal. Ugarit is a city north of Canaan. And as a result of worshiping Baal of Peor and abandoning God, the people were severely punished and many thousands were killed. Phinehas, the priest, the grandson of Aaron, eventually saves the people from being completely wiped out. It's so easy to place other things above God, even when we know God has done things for us. We may not worship Baal anymore, but anything that we place over the Lord becomes a god to us. We have to be vigilant about this. And while the Israelites were in Moab, God gave them instructions on what to do when they enter into Canaan. They were to drive out the inhabitants and their gods and their worshiping places. However, if they fail to do this, to drive out the people, to get rid of the gods, they will eventually come back and lead the Israelites astray. And if that happens, God will do to the Israelites what the Israelites were supposed to do to the Canaanites. And as we know from the rest of the Bible, this happens exactly. The Israelites do not drive out all the people. The Israelites constantly worship other gods, and ultimately God uses Assyria and Babylon to drive out the Israelites. Now, I know this chapter has been a lot. It's long, it's full of geographical locations, it's just an itinerary. Hopefully, I was able to break stuff up enough and make it enjoyable for you. Sadly, I wasn't able to cover everything because then we would be here for hours. But I do want to reiterate two things I mentioned at the beginning of this message. The first is that God acts in history. He literally acts in physical history. We saw most of these locations on the various maps. These are real places. And all of the peoples mentioned, the Israelites, the Amorites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, are real people. I could show you texts from all of these people in their own languages. God does not keep these things theoretical with nothing tangible. He literally interacts in history to demonstrate his power and his goodness. And secondly, God is always with his people. Whether good things or bad things happen, God is there. He's the only one who is always there for us. The Israelites, both the old and the new generation, saw the various things that God did for them, but they turned away and lost faith in him anyway. And if we recap our lives like Moses is doing here with the wilderness wanderings, how many mistakes will we see that we made? How many times have we grumbled against God, either outwardly or internally? How many times have we lost our faiths in him? Now look back at how many times we can see that God was actually there for us. I can think of many times where looking back, God was involved. God was with me. And this is why we should never let our faith in God be diminished. Now, a lot of people define faith as believing in something when there is no evidence to support that belief, just a blind faith view. But I disagree wholeheartedly with this definition. A more accurate definition to what the Bible actually teaches of faith is trusting in God because he has demonstrated countless times that he is God. Faith is the belief because of overwhelming evidence. And finally, I want to give us a call to action today, just like Moses did. We need to put away our idols, our phones, our money, our media, whatever it is, because all of these things can become thorns in our sides. And we need to put God first because God puts us first. Thank you for being here today. Let me end in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, I pray that I was able to speak everything that you wanted me to speak, Lord, and that I was able to honor and glorify you and do justice to your word, Lord. This is such a heavy passage, and I pray that with me exploring us through this, the locations and the events and the gods and everything, that the Bible has just come alive and that we seek to learn more about it and to dive deeper in it, Lord. And I pray that you just give us a fire in our hearts to seek you out, Lord. And as always, if I've said anything that dishonors you or is incorrect, please help us all to forget it, Lord. And in Jesus' name I pray, amen.